Welcome back to Cosmic Blueprints Astrology. Today we're diving deep into one of the most significant transits of early September, Saturn retrograde entering Pisces on September 1st. This is a powerful cosmic shift that's going to affect each zodiac sign in unique and transformative ways. Before we explore how this affects each individual sign, let's take some time to really understand what this transit means and why it's so significant. So what does Saturn represent? Saturn is known as the great teacher, the cosmic taskmaster, and the planet of structure, discipline, and responsibility. Saturn doesn't give us what we want, it gives us what we need to grow. It's the planet that says, show me your work, and demands that we build something lasting and meaningful. Saturn rules boundaries, limitations, authority, time, and karma. It's the planet of maturation. It forces us to grow, take responsibility, and build sustainable foundations for our lives. When Saturn touches something in our charts, it's asking us to get serious about that area of life. So what does Pisces represent? So Pisces is the final sign of the zodiac, representing the dissolution of boundaries, universal love, spirituality, and connection to the divine. It's ruled by Neptune, the power of dreams, illusions, mysticism, and transcendence. Pisces energy is fluid. It's intuitive, compassionate, and deeply spiritual. Pisces governs our connection to the collective unconscious, our psychic abilities, our dreams, our capacity for sacrifice and service, and our relationship with the divine. It's the sign of the mystic, the healer, the artist, and sometimes the martyr or the victim. So the paradox of Saturn and Pisces, here's where it gets interesting because Saturn and Pisces seem like complete opposites. Saturn wants structure, boundaries, and concrete results. Pisces wants to dissolve all boundaries and merge with the infinite. Saturn says build walls, while Pisces says tear them down. But this apparent contradiction creates incredible potential for spiritual growth and practical wisdom. Saturn in Pisces is asking us to build sustainable spiritual practices, to create healthy boundaries around our compassion and service, and to ground our mystical experience into practical reality. So what does retrograde mean? So when a planet is retrograde, it appears to be moving backward from our perspective on Earth. Energetically, retrograde periods are times of review, revision, and internal processing. Instead of moving forward with new experiences, we're called to go back and integrate, heal, or complete what we've already begun. Saturn retrograde is particularly powerful because it gives us a chance to revisit the lessons Saturn has been teaching us and make sure we've truly learned them. It's like getting extra time to complete an important assignment or retake a crucial test. Saturn retrograde in Pisces is the spiritual restructuring. So what happens when we combine Saturn's demand for structure and responsibility with Pisces' call for spiritual transcendence and then add the retrograde elements of review and intention? We get a transit that's asking us to revisit our spiritual foundations. Have you built your spiritual life on solid ground? Or are you spiritual bypassing, using spirituality to avoid dealing with practical reality? Saturn retrograde in Pisces is asking us to examine whether our spiritual practices actually support our growth or keep us in fantasy and escapism. It's also asking restructure of our boundaries around compassion. So Pisces wants to help everyone, but without Saturn's boundaries, this can lead to martyrdom, burnout, or resentment. This transit is teaching us the difference between healthy service and codependent enabling. It's asking us to integrate mystical experiences with practical reality. So have you had spiritual experiences that you've never fully integrated into your daily life? Saturn retrograde in Pisces wants us to take our mystical insights and build something tangible with them. It wants us to heal victim and savior patterns. So Pisces shadow includes both the victim who feels powerless and the savior who tries to rescue everyone. Saturn is asking us to mature beyond both of these patterns into empowered, responsible spiritual service. And it's also asking us to develop disciplined intuition. So this might sound like an oxymoron, but Saturn in Pisces is teaching us to trust our intuition while also developing the discipline to act on our inner guidance consistently. So the timing, why now? Saturn has been dancing between Pisces and Aries recently, and this retrograde journey back into Pisces is giving us one more chance to master these Piscean lessons before Saturn moves forward into Aries for a longer stay. This is particularly significant because we're in an era where humanity is being called to evolve spiritually while dealing with very practical material challenges. We need both mystical wisdom and practical solutions. So what to expect during this transit? This retrograde period might bring spiritual reckonings, so old spiritual beliefs or practices that no longer serve you may fall away. It's bringing boundary challenges, so you'll be tested on whether you can maintain healthy boundaries while remaining compassionate. It's bringing dreams and intuitive downloads. So pay attention to your dreams and intuitive hits. They're carrying important messages. You can expect compassion fatigue. You might feel overwhelmed by others' pain or needs, forcing you to develop more energetic boundaries. It could bring up past life or karmic themes, so old patterns, relationships, or spiritual lessons may resurface for final resolution. And then creative and healing blocks. If you're a healer or creative person, you might face obstacles that force you to develop more sustainable practices. So while Saturn transits can feel challenging, they are ultimately gifts. Saturn retrograde in Pisces is offering us the opportunity to become spiritually mature, to develop a relationship with the divine that's both transcendent and practical, both compassionate and has boundaries. This transit is preparing us to be spiritual warriors who can hold space for others without losing ourselves, who can access mystical wisdom while taking practical action, and who can serve from a place of strength rather than woundedness. Now that we understand the deeper meaning of this transit, let's explore how it will specifically affect each zodiac sign. Remember to check your sun, moon, and rising signs for the most complete picture, and pay special attention to any planets you have in Pisces, as they'll be directly activated by this transit. Hi Aries. So the house affected for you is 12th house, the house of subconscious, spirituality, and hidden enemies. So Aries, Saturn retrograde in your 12th house is taking you on a deep spiritual journey inward. This transit is asking you to slow down and examine what's been operating behind the scenes in your life. You might find yourself revisiting old spiritual practices, dealing with subconscious patterns that have been sabotaging your progress, or needing to establish better boundaries around your energy. This is a time to address any victim mentality or martyrdom complex that might be holding you back. Saturn is restructuring your relationship with surrender and asking you to find the balance between your natural leadership drive and the wisdom of letting go. Pay attention to your dreams during this time. They're carrying important messages. So the key focus for you would be spiritual discipline, releasing subconscious blocks, and establishing energetic boundaries. Hi Taurus. So the house affected for you for this transit is the 11th house, and this governs friendships, groups, hopes, and dreams. So Taurus, Saturn retrograde in your 11th house is restructuring your social circles and long-term aspirations. You're being asked to examine which friendships and group associations truly support your highest good versus those that drain your energy or keep you small. This transit might bring some disappointments or endings in friendships, but trust that this is clearing space for more aligned connections. Your hopes and dreams are also under review. Saturn wants you to build more realistic, sustainable plans for your future while still honoring your deepest aspirations. You might find yourself taking on more responsibility within groups or organizations, or stepping back from communities that no longer serve your growth. The key focus for this transit for you is restructuring friendships, clarifying long-term goals, and responsible group participation. Hey Gemini, so the house affected for you for this transit is the 10th house of career, reputation, and public image. So Gemini, Saturn retrograde in your 10th house is bringing a major review of your career path and public reputation. This transit is asking you to examine whether your professional life truly reflects your spiritual values and authentic self. You might be revisiting career decisions, dealing with authority figures who challenge your integrity, or being called to bring more compassion and intuition into your professional work. This could be a time of taking on more responsibility in your career or restructuring how you want to be known in the world. Saturn is asking you to build a legacy that honors both your practical skills and your spiritual wisdom. Don't be surprised if you feel called to incorporate healing, spirituality, or service into your professional path. So the key focus for you would be aligning career with spiritual values, building authentic reputation, and responsible leadership. Hi Cancer, so the house affected for you for this transit is the 9th house of higher education, philosophy, travel, and publishing. So Cancer, Saturn retrograde in your 9th house is restructuring your belief systems and approach to higher learning. This transit is asking you to examine what you truly believe about spirituality, philosophy, and the meaning of life. You might find yourself revisiting old teachings, returning to school, or being challenged to defend your spiritual or philosophical beliefs. This could also affect long-distance travel or relationships with people from other cultures. Saturn wants you to build a more mature, disciplined approach to your spiritual studies and beliefs. You're being called to move beyond emotional reactions to different viewpoints and develop a more compassionate understanding of diverse perspectives. So the key focus for you would be maturing spiritual beliefs, disciplined learning, and expanding worldview with wisdom. Hi Leo. So the house affected for you for this transit is the 8th house of shared resources, intimacy, transformation, and death or rebirth. So Leo, Saturn retrograde in your 8th house is bringing deep transformation around shared resources, intimacy, and psychological healing. This transit is asking you to examine your relationship with power, control, and vulnerability in your closest relationships. You might be dealing with issues around joint finances, inheritances, or other people's resources. More importantly, this transit is restructuring how you approach emotional intimacy and psychological depth. Saturn is asking you to develop healthy boundaries around emotional and energetic exchanges with others. This could be a powerful time for therapy, shadow work, or other forms of deep healing. You're being asked to take responsibility for your own emotional healing rather than expecting others to fix or complete you. So the key focus would be healing intimacy patterns, responsible resource sharing, and psychological transformation. Hi Virgo. So the house affected for you for this transit is the 7th house of partnerships, marriage, and open enemies. So Virgo, Saturn retrograde in your 7th house is restructuring your approach to partnerships and one-on-one relationships. This transit is asking you to examine what you truly need in relationships and whether your current partnerships support your spiritual growth. You might be revisiting the foundations of your marriage or committed relationships, dealing with legal matters, or being challenged to establish better boundaries with partners. Saturn wants you to build relationships based on mutual spiritual growth and compassion rather than codependency or convenience. This could bring some relationships to an end or require serious restructuring of existing partnerships. Trust that Saturn is helping you create more authentic, spiritually aligned relationships. The key focus would be restructuring partnerships, establishing relationship boundaries, and spiritual compatibility. Hey Libra, so the house affected for you for this transit is the 6th house of health, daily routines, work, and service. So Libra, Saturn retrograde in your 6th house is restructuring your daily routines, your health practices, and your approach to service. This transit is asking you to examine whether your daily habits support your physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. You might be dealing with health issues that require a more holistic, spiritually informed approach to healing. Saturn is also asking you to restructure how you serve others, moving away from people-pleasing or martyrdom toward more boundaried, sustainable service. This could be a time of changing jobs, restructuring your work environment, or taking on more responsibility in your current role. Focus on creating daily practices that nourish your spirit while serving your practical needs. So the key focus for you would be spiritual health practices, boundaried service, and restructuring daily routines. Hi Scorpio. So the house affected for you for this transit is the 5th house of creativity, romance, children, and self-expression. Scorpio, Saturn retrograde in your 5th house is restructuring your approach to creativity, romance, and self-expression. This transit is asking you to examine whether you're expressing your authentic self or hiding behind masks and personas. In romance, you might be revisiting old patterns or being called to develop more mature, spiritually aligned approaches to love. If you have children, this transit might bring increased responsibility or the need to establish better boundaries. Your creative expression is also under review. Saturn wants you to develop discipline around your creative gifts and use them for spiritual purposes or healing others. This is about moving from ego-driven creativity to soul-inspired expression. So the key focus for you for this month is authentic self-expression, mature approach to romance, and disciplined creativity. Hi Sagittarius, so the house affected for you for this transit is the 4th house, which is home, family, roots, and inner foundation. Sagittarius, Saturn retrograde in your 4th house is restructuring your home life, family relationships, and inner emotional foundation. This transit is asking you to examine your roots and whether your home environment supports your spiritual growth. You might be dealing with family responsibilities, caring for aging parents, or revisiting childhood patterns that still affect you today. Saturn wants you to create a home that serves as a spiritual sanctuary rather than a place of emotional chaos or drama. This could involve physical moves, renovations, or simply restructuring the energy of your current home. Focus on creating a foundation that supports both your need for freedom and your need for emotional security. The key focus for you for this transit is creating a spiritual home environment, healing family patterns, and your emotional foundation. Hi Capricorn, so the house affected for you for this transit is the 3rd house of communication, siblings, short travel, and learning. Capricorn, Saturn retrograde in your 3rd house is restructuring how you communicate and process information. This transit is asking you to examine whether your communication style reflects your spiritual values and serves your highest good. You might be revisiting relationships with siblings or neighbors, dealing with communication challenges, or being called to develop more compassionate ways of expressing yourself. Saturn wants you to move beyond purely practical communication toward more intuitive, heart-centered expression. This could also affect short-term distance travel, your local community involvement, or learning new skills. Focus on developing communication that bridges the practical and spiritual worlds. So the key focus around this transit would be compassionate communication, community healing, and intuitive learning. Hi Aquarius, so the house affected for you for this transit is the 2nd house of money, values, self-worth, and possessions. So Aquarius, Saturn retrograde in your 2nd house is restructuring your relationship with money, possessions, and self-worth. This transit is asking you to examine whether your values truly reflect your spiritual beliefs and whether your relationship with material resources supports your highest good. You might be revisiting financial decisions, dealing with many challenges that require creative solutions, or being called to develop a more spiritually aligned approach to earning and spending. Saturn wants you to build self-worth based on your spiritual value rather than external possessions. This could be a time of simplifying your possessions, developing new income streams based on your spiritual gifts, or restructuring your entire relationship with material security. So the key focus would be spiritual approach to money, building authentic self-worth, and conscious consumption. Hey Pisces, so your house affected for this transit is the 1st house of identity, appearance, first impressions, and your life direction. Pisces, this is your transit. Saturn retrograde in your first house is bringing a major restructuring of your identity and life direction. This transit is asking you to examine who you really are beneath all the roles and personas you've adopted. You might be dealing with health issues, changing your appearance, or feeling called to present yourself differently to the world. Saturn wants you to develop a more mature, disciplined approach to your spiritual gifts while maintaining your natural compassion and intuition. This is a time of taking responsibility for your life path and stepping into greater leadership around your spiritual gifts. You're being asked to embody the wise, healed version of yourself rather than staying in victim or savior patterns. So the key focus would be around restructuring identity, spiritual leadership, and mature self-responsibility. So for all the signs, and regardless of your sign, Saturn retrograde in Pisces is asking all of us to review and restructure our spiritual practices, establish healthier boundaries around compassion and service, release victim mentality and embrace spiritual responsibility, integrates our practical wisdom with intuitive guidance, heal any spiritual bypassing or martyrdom patterns, and trust our inner wisdom while building sustainable structures. Remember, Saturn retrogrades are not punishment. They're opportunities for spiritual restructuring and growth. This transit through Pisces is asking all of us to mature spiritually, develop disciplined compassion, and build foundations that honor both our practical needs and our spiritual truth. The key is to embrace both Saturn structure and Pisces flow. We need both discipline and intuition, both boundaries and compassion, both practical wisdom and spiritual faith. So how is Saturn retrograde in Pisces showing up in your life? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Cosmic Blueprints Astrology for more in-depth astrological guidance. So until next time, keep building your cosmic blueprint with wisdom and compassion.